Now we will we've talked about the what, we've talked about the why, and now we'll talk a little bit about the how. So Kate, can I ask you to come up here and let me pull your slides up? Or JC, and excellent.
You can pull the slides up.
Okay.
All right.
Slide. Actually, put this in front of you.
Try not to destroy any computers during this briefing. All right. So some of the content in the standards and formats presentation you will have heard. Thank you for also being here. You'll have heard before. We did a pretty good job of having our homework done on time. This is sort of a bit of a capstone for us. We also do want to solicit feedback. We've gone through one set of solicitations, but we definitely want to get any last comments that people have on this. So afterwards, please look up the resources and give us comments. So this is the agenda for our presentation. Basically what we've done. And our summary of it. So our charter was very clear. It really had to do with, first of all, survey of the landscape, what exists, what is being used, whether it's commercial or open source, what are the initiatives that are underway, and how do we get to a survey and an analysis of what provides machine-readable data, right? Because it was very clear from the beginning, if it's not machine-readable, it's not automatable, and if it's not automatable, it's really kind of not real from a security and an assurance perspective because manual processes don't scale. So investigate today's options, start to map between those to understand what's out there, what the formats are that have in common, where they don't have commonalities. We explicitly acknowledge that this is not one solution to rule them all, that there are actually slightly different use cases, both upstream and downstream for software bills of materials, and we need formats that accommodate that range of use cases, so it's not about finding the one. And to wit, how those solutions can work in harmony. If there are different use cases for SBOMs and there's different formats that are in the sweet spot for those different use cases, how do they harmonize? As well as to reach out and look about what's available internationally, because there are efforts underway around the world in this domain, and we want to make sure that we've got everything on the radar. So, objectives, right? Success looks like machine-readable format that provides direct linkages to both the components and the suppliers. So there's different terms that have been bandied about, publisher, project, everything has been brought under this whole rubric of a supplier, whether it's a commercial or an open source project. Things that can be signed, right? Because in addition to the composition, there's issues associated with chain of custody, right? Where did it come from? How did it get here? And that all of this be automatable, because there's just too much volume and velocity right now to make anything but automatable solutions viable. Again, we looked at both commercial and open source solutions. There was a bias towards lightweightness, because in both the consumption and the production of software, there are entities large as well as many entities that are small, that are not highly capitalized. And a lot of the vulnerability comes from those end-tier suppliers. So we want to be able to look at solutions that can disseminate throughout the supplier base. And also things that can integrate into the software development process. So rather than being an afterthought, how can we look at solutions and formats that can be produced, again, automatically as an artifact of the software development process? What's new in the white paper that we have? So we have some examples. We're very much favor of show rather than tell. And these are, albeit toy examples, it's really important to have examples. And we've illustrated this example both in SPDX and the SWID formats. And additional formats have been added to the survey, as well as discussions of, kind of pluses and minuses of those formats. Contributor section has been added, and the standard wordsmithing and formatting has been done. So, Kate, do you want to talk about the example?
Sure. This is the example that Art had. We just have not rotated it around, and we were looking at it from the perspective of what Acme software is coming in, and have included this one in the documentation. We'll probably, after we get everything consolidated and collaborated, we will update this as well. But understanding what includes what was part of what the framing group determined as sort of a minimum viable. And so what we've got is this example in the document, as well as SWID and SPDX expressions of how to represent that in those formats. Everyone can just sort of open the document and sort of look at what it actually looks like. You should be able to pick out the right elements pretty quickly. I didn't cut and paste it into here. Other formats that have been raised. Should I keep going? Yeah?
Yeah, sure.
We've been hearing Cyclone DX and in toto, so we're going to be adding that into the survey. And then the open question and ask for help from this group is, are there other formats that you guys are hearing that you want to see shown, described in the survey and contrasted and compared? So I think we've got most of the ones we all know about at this point. But if there's anything missing, this is the right window to please let us know. And any comments or feedback about where we're missing things, or if, reviews and comments would be welcome at this point.
Okay, so I think we're leaning into some potential next steps. One of them is a tooling survey. So, oh, sure.
This is not, I'm not campaigning for this, but I do hear a lot of supporters of this multi-stakeholder process have started experimenting with Cyclone DX, and it feels like early on we went SWID and SPDX. I'm not saying we should revisit that. I'm just asking explicitly, is that one already planned to be in your comparative?
I think we should basically keep the formats as a sort of living thing.
Yeah.
Right. So I know, so we have a SIVA format and Cyclone DX, and there's going to be others. And so I think that it would probably be better to have that other formats as a kind of participatory thing where people could document them.
Yeah, we just have basically a small section at the end, at least have the mention and where they can go look up more information about these formats. Cyclone DX is sort of an interesting one in the sense that it seems to be tracking what the framing group is doing and then iterating over time with it. And so it's a bit of an evolving one too. So it's sort of hard to sort of put a line in the sand there right now.
From our working group's perspective, and especially if we add the action item that Duncan's requesting here, which is mapping which use cases are possible or better or best,
Okay.
there might be a material, use case prohibited or unlocked by the presence or absence of something in their comparison, right?
And I think that we also, as we move into this kind of tooling discussion about what's out there to produce these things, we also need to really take a look at what are the tolerances of these various formats at scale, because we've done a lot of testing of various formats of, well, what does it mean for a system to produce one of these things from one pipeline, 100, 1,000, or 10,000? And there are some real limitations associated with things that were not built for scale from the get-go. Some of that's language limitations. And so for an enterprise that's just running, developing one application in one pipeline, it may not really matter. But for enterprises that are running 600 pipelines, 60 times a day, it may matter.
Yeah. We do have various constituents that are operating at scale. We need to have something that will work at scale as well as be lightweight enough that individual open source upstream projects can actually apply things to. So we've got that whole spectrum here that has to come into play. And each of these formats was designed with various dimensions in mind. Oops, am I too quiet? Yeah, sorry. Each of these formats was designed with various dimensions and capabilities in mind. And so it's basically mapping those dimensions and capabilities to the use cases is what's needed, I think, still. But I'll take a note and we'll see if we can discuss that more. Any other questions?
Question.
So I guess more of a note, I guess, than a question when it comes to this.
Can you remind us who you are?
I'm Mark Galpin with JFrog. I guess from the perspective of companies like ours, I mean, if you look at the subject of SBOMs, there are a lot of tools that are effectively tasked with creating SBOMs today. I can tell you, being one of said tools, that we all basically use proprietary formats to express those. And of course, part of the reason we all use proprietary formats is because for a whole host of reasons, there isn't a well-accepted standard in the community of what we should be outputting on. And I guess from my perspective, you know, we'll be perfectly happy in the event that there is a broad community acceptance that this is the standard they should be outputted on, you know, setting aside quibbles that will then be had whether various, you know, key pieces of metadata are or are not included and you know, sorting out those wonderful aspects of open standards, which we are still, I think, a ways away from getting to that type of discussion. But I think in the meantime, I guess my question is, what, if anything, are we doing in this sort of forum to sort of acknowledge the fact that, you know, yes, vendors do exist that have these proprietary formats.
I think that's very important, and I say this as another tool maker with another proprietary format, right? So, but I think the thing is, when we look at all our formats, we're saying a lot of the same
absolutely.
things, right? So it's the JSONs in a different order.
Yep.
And one of the things that we've discovered, because we provide assurance for other people's products, is that the format that you're in ultimately, if you're producing all the data, changing the format is easy. It's whether you have the data to start with or not, that's the hard part, and a lot of people don't.
Yeah, no,
So-
I agree 100%. That's why I said I'm not here to quibble about what should be in or should not be in the
I think
format
this is
at
where the
point.
framing group has a real role to play, and the use cases group has a real role to play in the sense of what can be accomplished in the presence of data, whatever format it's in,
Right.
because the presence or absence or the ease of production of that data is such a higher mountain than putting it in a different format that getting to stage 0 on a real industry level is just the hardest part. And I think if people can understand, what do I need to output, like how many levels down, stuff like that, we can take our requirements TXT files and you know, Ruby gems and whatever, and we can converge on some formats, but understanding what has to be in those things or those things plus enhancements, I think that's where I think all the vendors kind of have to sort of keep their eyes on the horizon.
Yeah, no, and I completely agree with that statement. I guess what I was looking for maybe in the document was, you know, I don't get the feeling that we're trying at this stage to invoke that convergence, right? I think it's coming, and like I said, I look forward to it.
So the start of that convergence happened when we started doing the translation between the different formats and what the framing group has come up with. There's actually a table in the document underneath the table 1 actually,
Okay.
on the translation and harmonization guide, where the fields from the 2 different formats express the field, what's been identified to date so far from framing as what's important in a minimal SBOM.
Right.
And so that's
Yeah,
there.
and I would actually encourage, in the spirit of including more formats, but with some rigor, that new formats that are included have to go in this table, have to go into this mapping table of what's in it that's exactly the same as what is in these other things, and what is in it that's not the same, and what's it all called? Because if we don't have that table where we can say, apples to oranges to kiwis, then it's all just going to be my baby's prettier because they're my baby, and that doesn't really help anyone.
Yeah. We also have a lot of those proprietary, each individual format is expressed as APIs, and they're not versioned, and they change over time, and so as making things machine readable and consumable by others becomes a problem here.
And just down the line to respond, if we have this all in the table, that actually gives us the precondition for the kind of SBOM decoder ring that it would be trivial to write.
Yes, well, I guess basically that was the process question I was trying to ask.
Yeah.
And really important process question, so thank you. I want to go to Bruce, and then Josh, and then Duncan.
So we need a canonical format, and it might be one of the candidates ones, SPDX, SWID something, or it might be this document. But we should define what it is that's going to be our canonical format. If it's the framing document, great. Then let's say that. If it's not the framing document, then let's say what standard it is, and then we'll define the mapping from the canonical ones to all the other ones that are possible. And if you want to bring up a new candidate, part of your job is to define the mapping. It's not easy to map between these things. And as someone who's done these kinds of things before, and there's all kinds of things like direction. And we have long discussion already about direction. What is up, down versus down? And you'll have the same things there. People will think that when this is related to this, it's this direction or that direction. I mean, there's loads and loads of them. So, part of this, if we want to get adoption fast, we have to define the canonical format. And I don't care if it's a standard or the framing document or some other document, but it has to be one.
I think canonical is a really interesting word because it's from religion.
Yep.
And generally, it's good to stay away from religion when it comes to software. I think that we have identified some robust formats, and we've also suggested that there are others that we can map against them. How hard or easy it is to do that mapping, it really depends on the complexity of your data and the skill of your technical team. I mean, we've converted between 3 formats in a weekend in meme compliant XML. So that's an exercise left for the reader.
So continuing with the language term, I think process in this working group is set out to be ecumenical exactly because I don't think while there are pockets of use of all of this stuff, we are not in a world where there is a clear winner. And this is where I put on the government hat and say it's not the government's job to be picking winners and losers. And I'm guessing that more than half of us have been involved in the standards fights before. And so I want to applaud this group for trying to sort of say, let's talk about how we get an SBOM in an automated model, and then we can move on from there from a tooling perspective and let the market decide. And I very much take your point of saying, let's have the standard model of what an SBOM is. I think the framing group, which a bunch of you have been participating in, has done a very good job of that. And I think the standards group took that from the framing group.
So these are our next set of deliverables.
Hang on, before we jump into the next set,
Yeah.
2 more. Yeah.
want to make sure we capture what's in the room.
All right, just to repeat myself, in that graphic, that beautiful purple graphic, we're all in a supply chain. Most of us are in the middle. So as someone in the middle, in a practical sense, my customers are asking for, some of them are demanding SWID, some of them are demanding SPDX. I'm going to produce both, right? And if I get more Cyclone DX, I'm going to produce a third one. Just like you can see in a lot of reporting things, export as a PDF, comma separated files, XML. Like this will just be a presentation layer output if we have the data.
Yeah, I think that.
If we have the data.
Yeah, and Microsoft documents, you can now export, I think, 11 formats.
RTF. And,
yeah.
But on the other side, I have tools that I need. So I went to them and I said, how are you going to support me taking your tool and producing these plural? And they said, we're going to produce all of them. We're just waiting to see. I don't think they should wait to see, but they're intending to give me the options for those as well. So as long as people can produce the data types, both as me producing them to my demanding customers, if I want their money in a free market, and for the tool chains that I'm going to use to meet that requirement, like I think it's going to be pluralistic for a little, multilingual for a little while.
Question over here.
Mike.
Mike?
Sorry. So I have three questions that sort of evolved through all the discussions that have come up since my hand went up. The first is more substantive, and the second is just a point of 2 points of clarification. So the first one is, during the discussions on formats, well, actually, I think it came up in all three groups, but I think it was the format group that got tagged with it. There was this issue of identifying the piece of software you were talking about and how to do that. And so one question is, did that get resolved, the whole, whether we used, I don't know, there were three-letter acronyms, I don't even remember that were talked about. So anyway, so the first question is just, did that get resolved, and is that in there, or is that sort of just hand wave still? The second question is on Cyclone, is a point of clarification on the Cyclone DX. So the current document has one line in appendix that literally says the word Cyclone DX, and there's no text under it. Is there if I understood you right, the intent is just to put some text in there, right? Not to put it in the table that you said it doesn't really count unless you're in the table. So I just wanted clarification on that. And then third is, you'd made some comments about things not scaling. Was that a particular comment about you tried something with Cyclone DX, or that was a generic, these two work and you haven't tried it with other ones? Those are my three questions. Thank you.
Order backwards going. So no experiments have been tried with Cyclone DX. No one has stepped forward to do the work. Okay, first off, someone has to step forward, do the work, add the stuff in, and prove it out. Most of this has been done by people who have been stepping forward, who are experts in their areas and doing the work. We have not become experts in domains. Next question back.
To follow on, yes, more text about Cyclone DX, that's easy, but when it comes to do the mapping, it kind of goes to Kate's point of who from Cyclone DX is going to come forward and do the work to get that mapping into the table.
Did I misremember? Wasn't the inventor of Cyclone DX and in this room at the last meeting?
Yeah, and he's actually participating in adding questions into SPDX too. So I think there's a reasonable collaboration emerging at the technical level. We are planning on putting a description of Cyclone DX. That's, if you actually looked at the Google Doc, you'd see that's a work to be done area. And we need to add in Todo in, which is what we're commenting on. And so I'm looking for other formats that may need to be added so that we make sure we have a fairly complete survey of the landscape at this point. And then your first question was, sorry.
The naming.
Oh, yeah. So there's multiple approaches right now for identifying that software component out there. Software Heritage has IDs, CPE has their identifiers, Perl is there, and all of them have strengths and weaknesses. It came down to, with a lot of discussions with the framing group, that we needed the 4 elements that are listed in this table of, the supplier, the component, and so forth. The component itself can be anything from a container to a package, to a distro, to a file, to a snippet.
Or a repo.
Repo. So, it's sort of like a container could be like, a directory even for that matter. Or it's not a container, component can be a directory, sorry. So we have used the term component because it has the ability to scale across those concepts.
And I'll say more generally, as someone who deals in software logistics, not just software assurance, that when you get into this issue of naming, this is where 2 domains that are related but not the same touch each other. One is assurance. What do I know about the thing? And then the other is chain of custody, which is, what specific, where exactly did it come from? That particular copy of that particular file, how is it taken down, moved, and delivered, right? So you have a concept of location and transportation that bumps into this, what's on the packing label. And it's a very interesting discussion about, how much of that does any customer want to know? When it comes to hardware, people are much more firm about their requirements that they want, the tracking of where the box is. With software, that discussion is not really mature. And there are very demanding customers, and then there are customers who have absolutely no chain of custody or care. And we're sorting that out.
Just point of clarification, because in the healthcare, which we're going to hear from next, but in the healthcare trial in the previous presentation, last time they presented on it, they mentioned that was one of the issues. They had 4 versions of what a human could look at and go, oh, those are all the same thing, but people named them different. So how we're going to deal with that is is it punted or solved?
And on one hand, you're right, it is a little hand wavy. On the other hand, need to acknowledge that what you are attempting to do is provide something that works for as much of software as possible. That covers an enormous domain. Naming, we've talked about this from the first meeting, is a known hard problem. I don't think everyone has a solution, which is everyone should just name things the way I name things. And that works really well. I think the standards group, and thank you to everyone who participated in this group, and thank you to JC and Kate, had a very hard problem, which is they had to try to talk about this in format world, right? Roll up your sleeves and build things, but at the same time still try to be as agnostic as possible about any particular solution, because as someone who runs these processes, everyone loves to say, oh yeah, let's just slip my product in this government document that I can run around with.
And also
they did
just
a great job of avoiding
getting away from that. I mean, the sort of, you get to this principle of verification, right? Which is, how do I know that thing that you call Acme version 1.4 is that thing that I can fetch down over there? And as Ellen said, it's a complicated technical issue.
And we also have, and that I think is just speaking exactly, that's why a lot of folks in the framing group really wanted to see hash as something that we can use. So there are a number of different options. All right, do you want to do a very quick tease of what we're going to be talking about after lunch?
Well, so open questions that have been coming back for us are, okay, how do I use these formats? What's out there? What can I use today? What can I use? What's in people's pipelines? What can I use today? So we'd like to try to see if we can get a survey of what's actually happening with these formats today and what tools are available for people to start to build into their CI and CD loops and work from that.
And also, I think that to speak about, different formats and different vendors and providers, I think this kind of quick start guide, I would personally love to see, okay, here's a piece of software in a repository somewhere that's open. Here's the tooling to produce a SWID tag. Here's a tooling to produce SPDX. Here's a JFrog. Here's a ion channel SIVA, and then people can essentially show and tell and, get into a discussion about how it's used and what's good about it or whatever and where the mappings are.
Okay, that's where we'd like to sort of head towards. So I guess just to take us home is the initial goals we've had for this work group. I think we've pretty much come to the stage of achieving them. The options are pretty much all investigated. We've documented them. And we had a very explicit goal of acknowledging no single winner. And so I think we've kept to that.
Yeah. And as things get more real and exemplars exist, I think that's where some smart person or people can probably take maybe 2 weekends and create, here's your decoder ring between these things, and just automate that, and then we'll all be happy.
And so I think that's sort of where we are.
All right.
And so if you guys have got any feedback in the next 2 weeks on the document, by September 15th, if you could send email to one of us or to the mail list, or write it in the Google Doc. We've got the link there too. So whichever way is most convenient to you. Thanks.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.